Hi, Father.
Hey, Kelsey, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Great.
Thanks for coming in today to talk to us about discernment.
Thanks for having me. It's a joy.
You want to start off by telling the people a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Father Paul Sullivan, I'm a priest. I've been so for almost 16 years. And I serve as a pastor. I'm at St. Gregory Parish in Phoenix, just west of downtown. Great community. I also serve at Nazareth House Seminary as a rector. And what more? I'm just love life as a priest.
Love that. So, like I said, today we're going to be chatting about discernment. Do you mind just giving us a little overview?
Discernment. What is that? It's one of those fancy Catholic words that people use, and it's maybe intimidating to some. But all it means is knowing deep down what's from God and what's not. Mm-hmm. And becoming attuned to the voice within us, where there's peace, there's goodness, there's inspiration, where it's God, where we're more ourselves, and we're just listening interiorly and letting that guide us. And always, if we let that guide us, it always leads us to God's will, to deeper happiness.
Yeah. What do you think is the most important first step in discernment? Is it finding a spiritual director, saying the rosary? What would you recommend if someone just had no idea where to start?
Yeah, the first part was just making sure that you have in your life time for prayer. And time for prayer, but also time for prayer in the graces of the sacraments. I wouldn't recommend running out there and getting a spiritual director right away. First of all, because there's not that many out there. But also because the church has built that into the sacramental life, most especially in the sacrament of reconciliation. It's wonderful. The Catechism has this great line. It says that confession is usually followed by a spiritual grace and spiritual consolation. It always has grace, but there's a sense of spiritual consolation that will come with that sacrament. And a lot of times that's because we've gone there and we've honestly said, hey, here's this that I see in my life, which means discernment's happening. I'm seeing things, I'm noticing, leaving what is not of God and receiving grace and inspiration to follow what's of God. So that's how it starts. Prayer and silence.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously you're a priest. You've had lots of experience with discernment, so you know it's not always a quick answer to things. It's not just like a one situation, I need to discern this and then I'm moving on. We're kind of constantly discerning things in our life.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about just the experience of discernment and what that might look like?
Sure. I mean, I think we could say that discernment is what just Christians do. They live in relationship. So for example, say you were married to a wonderful man named Noah, and over time, you got to really be attuned to him when he makes maybe a sigh. And you say, oh, I know what that means. Or you see something on his face, and you notice something, his expression or something like that, or the way he's carrying himself, or maybe on this given day there's a little more energy or less energy or something like that. You're just being attuned to Noah, and you're knowing him, and that allows you to love him more, to allow him to be known by you, and you to see him and be with each other, right? In a sense, that's really what discernment is. It's a Christian life where we get closer and closer to God, and we can at a given moment say, yeah, I think this right where I'm at right now, I think this is God. Or I'm doing something and I just have some disquiet. I'm missing peace and saying, yeah, something's off here, Like in the story of salvation or in the history of the church, when you want to know what's correct, ask the saints. This or that teaching. Well, what did Mother Teresa think? What did John Paul II think? Ask the people that are really close to the Lord, because they are kind of attuned to Him, and He's inviting us to His love and His goodness. So that's how I'd talk about it.
Yeah. So often when we discern things, it requires action steps afterwards, and we have to do a lot of things, whether that's a relationship or religious life. There are things that we need to take steps forward. What advice would you give to people who might be in that process? They've discerned something and maybe are moving forward and are growing less and less confident.
So there's times where, for example, one is inspired to something, right? And oftentimes that'll happen, say on a mountaintop. You're inspired to, say, get engaged, or a conviction about, hey, I do feel called, say, to marriage, and marriage in light of the Lord and faithfulness, and maybe after a bit of time that doesn't come to fruition right away or something like that, and you say, we might be tempted to kind of lower the standard or kind of give up on that inspiration. But to notice, okay, where am I at now? And where was I when I was first inspired to this, right? And where do I wish to be? There was a basketball coach who had asked 3 questions to his players. He would say, know where you've been, where are you now, and where would you like to be, right? That's actually pretty good discernment right there. Just those questions. Where have I been? Where would I like to be now? Where would I want to be in the future? So yeah, there's times when we might be convicted of something. I was inspired to that, say for example, that call to marriage, and now maybe I'm just not feeling it, or it's not coming to fruition right away, or God's taking his sweet old time to find the person, right? I could be tempted to give up on that inspiration, right? Notice that and say, do I want to listen to this discouragement that's coming now, or do I want to trust in the encouragement that I received in the past? I want to be attentive to that. That's the thing. Very often, like for example, I work with seminarians, and they're called and inspired, and then you get going down the road and you get tired, or you get maybe a little challenged by what lies ahead. So I always use the analogy of the GPS, right? So you put in your car the GPS, the directions, right? And it speaks to you. For example, we are here in Tempe, and we said we wanted to go to, say, Huntington Beach. We want to go to California. This little GPS is going to speak to us, right, from this location right here for about 10, 12 minutes straight, because it's going to get us from this street over to that street up to McClintock, left on the 202, and then over to the 10. But once we're on the 10, it's going to just stop talking. That's kind of like how sometimes it seems like it happens in the spiritual life. Where, oh gosh, God was inspiring me to go in this direction. Well, and it seems like he's been quiet. Well, he has you in the right direction. And my time as I'm driving hour after hour toward the beach in California, I'm not going to hear anything. And I might get a little bothered. I might get tempted to say, gosh, God's not speaking to me. Nothing's happening to me spiritually in my life right now. Maybe something's wrong. Maybe I need to change. Maybe I need to get off the road or whatever. But the reality is, the last time God spoke to us and pointed us in the right direction, he had us in the right direction. And he doesn't need to speak to us right now. And so we can just trust that we're going in the right direction. Now, as I drive to the beach, if the GPS keeps speaking to me, it's kind of like having training wheels. It's okay. But as I'm stretched 6-7 hours to trust and stay on the road, I'm growing in trust. That's good for me. And I'm remembering. I'm able to say, I don't need God to hold my hands at every moment. I can remember the times he's spoken to me. So there's many times in all of our spiritual lives where God has inspired us, out of love for us, moving us to inspirations, to holiness. And it's important for us not to just get those at the moment and be done with them, but to take them, remember them, just like the person in the car driving saying, I remember that it said keep going west on I-10, right? So we have to remember the moments of grace and inspiration in our lives.
Yeah, so good. Thank you, Father.
No problem. Happy to do that.
So oftentimes when we're talking about discernment, it's often in the context of, discerning a religious vocation. But I was wondering if you could share any practical tips or helpful advice to someone who maybe is discerning a dating relationship. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, practical tips. Here we go. Is this person helping me to come close to the Lord? Mm-hmm. Is this person open to the deeper realities of our lives? So if marriage is what it is, and we believe firmly, the church documents have said this, that we are more united. When people are married, they're more united spiritually, then emotionally, then psychologically, then physically, right? There's a deep, deep bond, and that's why the divorce rates are so low for those who pray together. So the practical tips: is there openness to this interior life? Is there intimacy in that interior life? And over time, is it okay for us to pray together? And is that a stable part of our lives? Now, you also have the mix of just all the humanity, right? When you meet somebody, there's just a mix of humanity, and we might be tempted to over spiritualize relationships. So on the human side, you say, okay, we have these ways about us how we mix, and personally, Lord, how do I change myself more into myself for the good of a future spouse? Or what are boundaries that we need to put in place around our own human failures and weaknesses? Whether that be, I don't want to be spoken to that way or this way, or we need this or that as far as time apart, time together, things like that. So really letting God discern the practicals. Sometimes, again, it's tempting to over spiritualize things and just say, oh, it's going to be okay, I'll just stay in the spiritual. But like, no, Lord, how do I enter deeply into this relationship? Because this relationship is not merely spiritual. It's full on human, day in and day out, right? With all the things of life. So,
Father, since you've walked with a lot of people and perhaps had experience with this, sometimes people have maybe rightly or not as, well discerned a relationship and have made a commitment and are maybe married and are developing in this relationship with the Lord and don't really know how to begin, this prayer life with their spouse or with their family.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you can speak to on that?
See, it often happens when someone, they come to meet the Lord after they're married and they say, gosh, we've never had that. It's kind of, there's not open to this right now. Beautiful. Beautiful. That's probably the Lord prompting for both, and he's speaking through one to the other, and he's got just this plan to work it out. The question is, Lord, help me to see my spouse as you see them. And everything will follow that. Like, for example, say somebody, a woman, a wife is moved to the Lord and desires to have that deep relationship with God and with her husband, but he's not ready yet. Okay, great. But God who brought you together, he knows that, and he can take care of it. And the question is, how does the Lord want to work through you? How does he want to be everything for you, so that you can be the wife you're made to be? So it can be a source of great grace, what could at first seem like a place of frustration. I'm desiring this, I'm coming to the Lord, and I'm frustrated that we don't have this together. That can be a great frustration. However, it's also a great avenue and really a call to holiness for one to deeply trust in the Lord and then pray into how to be the spouse of that one who doesn't believe, or that's not at a place where we'd like them to be. In that sense, we trust in what Scripture says, like the prayer of a faithful wife will save the husband. And I'm sure it's the same vice versa. But our job is to just let the Lord in and say, Lord, how? And perhaps the question is more, what's the love you have for us? How do you see us? As opposed to simply saying, what's correct or what are we not doing right? That can lead to frustration. But the consolation will be in letting the Lord show how to be with him and how to be with the spouse in that moment.
It's beautiful. Thanks, Father.
No problem.
Could you share a little bit about how you discerned, maybe?
Oh, so long ago. That's great. The Lord blessed me with a lot of graces that I didn't realize until later on. Of course, I knew them, but I now looking back and saying, wow, that was really the hand of the Lord. I noticed that at that time in my life, in my early 20s, I noticed that I was receiving a great amount of peace when I would just come to church. All I was doing was just going to church, but I would just notice, wow, that's the most peaceful time of my week. And I noticed that when I was returning strongly to the sacrament of reconciliation and taking that seriously, and in daily prayer, especially the rosary, noticing, this is like changing me. It's just changing the way I'm thinking. I'm feeling more like myself. Again, that's a key indicator. Am I more myself of being in God's will or where we are with Him? So I noticed that. I also came around to a bunch of good friends that were also living the faith, and it's very hard to live the faith alone. So that was a great blessing for me as a young man. So very encouraging. And I was just becoming more myself. And of course, the idea of the priesthood came on the radar, and that was scary at first and all that stuff. But again, you take it to the Lord and say, Lord, what do you think? How do you see this? Right? So I got to the point where nothing really attracted me about the priesthood in terms of the work of the priesthood or what I would do at first. And it was just that it was intimidating. But deep down, I had a sense of like, I think that's what I'm called to be. So if I could just look at that, and as I looked at that, it's like, yeah, give it a try. We'll date at least. We'll consider it, right? And then over time it becomes more and more clear.
Yeah. Praise God.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Father.
Thank you all for this. And thank you all for, the people that are listening to this, of course, are people that are tuned in and looking for extra ways to grow in their faith. Thank you. And keep asking the Lord how he wants you to be you, and that will affect the world.
Yeah. Amazing. Thanks, Father.
Thanks.